Welcome to Brooks Memorial Library. I'm Starla Tronica, and I am the director of this fabulous library and also a member of the festival organizing committee. This year's festival, as you probably know, is made possible by the generous support of our festival sponsors: Brattleboro Community Television, Jenny Atschuler and Barry Green, Elizabeth Catlin, the Stepansky Family Trust, the Vermont Humanities Council, and Poets and Writers. We would also like to thank our advertisers in your beautiful programs, and we encourage you to support them. The festival is run entirely by volunteers, but it has very real expenses. So we encourage you to make a donation. There are several donation boxes there at sometime this weekend, or you can use the little QR code on your program, or there are cards scattered all about town that you can do that with. So please take this moment to turn off the ringer on your cell phone, but feel free to use it to take photos and share them with us on social media. So it is my pleasure this morning to introduce our two speakers this morning. Samuel Kolalawe was born and raised in Ibadan, Nigeria. He is the author of a new critically acclaimed novel, The Road to the Salt Sea. His work has appeared in Agni, 5 Points, New England Review, Georgia Review, the Hopkins Review, Gulf Coast, Washington Square Review, Harvard Review, Image Journal, and other literary publications. He has received numerous residencies and fellowships and has been a finalist for the Caine Prize for African Writing, Grey Wolf Press Africa Prize, International Book Award, and UK's The First Novel Prize. He won an editor-writer mentorship program for diverse writers. He is a graduate of the MFA in Writing and Publishing at Vermont College of Fine Arts and earned his PhD in English and Creative Writing from Georgia State University. He has taught creative writing in Africa, Sweden, the United States, and currently teaches fiction writing as an assistant professor of English and African Studies at Pennsylvania State University. He is also a faculty member in the low residency MFA writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Suspenseful, incisive, and illuminating, The Road to the Salt Sea is a story of family, religion, survival, wild hope, and the perils facing those who dare to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Kolalawe's artistry is such that the reader is with the narrator, able God, every dangerous step of the way. Please give a warm welcome to Samuel Kolalawe.
Hello. Thank you for coming. I'd like to appreciate the organizers of this event for this wonderful festival. This is my 9th event this year. And it's always a pleasure to kind of travel around the country to, engaging with readers and all of that. And I'm so grateful for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you. So the title of my novel is The Road to the Salt Sea, and it kind of started in 2013. I was part of this project with a group of artists and writers called the Invisible Borders Project, and the idea was that nation states, there shouldn't be any borders, so whatever. And then we would travel from country to country. It was a road trip. So we made a road. We traveled across West Africa. So we started in Nigeria, Benin Republic, Togo, Ghana. I would travel to a country and we'll stop there and then do performances, readings, and whatnot. And it was great until I got to Ghana and we had, time to kind of, do stuff. And I went out and I met a group of men who had tried to travel to Europe across the Sahara. Before then, I I had an idea, I knew something about the trans-Saharan migration or the trans-Saharan, what I call the trans-Saharan migrant crisis, but it was the first time I was going to actually meet someone or people who actually went on that journey. And it was harrowing, and I just never got that out of my mind. I kept thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more, and then I decided to do some research about it, and I found, wow, terrible things. That happened over the course of maybe 3-4 years. And I did a lot of research, and I realized that it's an important subject. A lot of people don't know about it because it's underreported in the media. Whenever it's reported in the media, it's seen through the Western gaze. It's also underrepresented in literature. People have written about migration in so many ways, different forms. They've written about the African immigrant experience, but I've not seen a novel that really captures this trans-Saharan migrant crisis, people leaving West Africa and traveling across the Sahara and crossing the Mediterranean Sea. And so I decided to, I first wrote a short story titled Sweet, Sweet Strawberry Taste. It was published in Agni, a great literary journal in Boston. And I just wanted to test it out. I was like, okay, let me just see how this is going to go. So I wrote the story in the third person plural, the voice, the we voice. And it connected with readers in a very strange way. I didn't realize that it was going to connect with readers that much. And then I said, okay, maybe I'll turn this into a novel. And that was what led to, this book right here. And I'm just going to read, I'm not going to preface it, it speaks for itself. I'm just going to read a section. It's on page 191. How many of you have read it already? Oh. Fantastic. So great. It's on page 191. If you have not read it, you should read it. Okay. The name of my protagonist is Able God, which is, I'll explain, that's another thing. Able God looked forward to the moments they spent in the paddy wagon, being ferried to and from the farm. The inmates were hardly ever allowed to speak casually during work, and they were too tired to do anything when they returned to camp. In the dark wagon, they sang together, shared horror stories, stories of beginnings, and stories about stories. They spoke of their families and loved ones. There was Magodi, whose family had been butchered by Al-Shabaab and who had no choice but to run for his life. Tesfaye had fled the oppressive dictatorship in Eritrea and vowed to go back to change his country after succeeding overseas. Desmond had left Ghana because Anselm, his brother, told him to come join him. Anselm had traveled the same treacherous path 3 years earlier, and he was now in Europe and doing well. Drought has driven al-Bashir from Somalia. Billy was convinced he was born in a body with the wrong nationality. He was Senegalese, but he had always known he was French. Confidence had seen a Facebook ad and decided to pursue it. Anas, a fisherman, thought crossing the sea would be easy. What he hadn't expected, though, were all the obstacles he would face before reaching the sea. Aruna had languished in a detention camp in Libya for over a year and had been sent back to face his family empty-handed. When you fall off a horse, you have to get back in the saddle, he told his fellow inmates. There was God is good, who had been told by a prophet that his glory could only shine once he had ventured beyond the shores, and that staying in his native country meant cutting misfortune. There were, of course, the boys from the abandoned buildings with their hopes and their addictions. The time they spent sharing their stories and their grief brought them comfort. It gave them a sense that they were not alone. Those cooped up with Marufu were often made to listen to football commentary from a Philips transistor radio. Able God was not always enthusiastic about riding in the wagon with the Marufu, even though it did not fault him. His love for the game of football. Now, football is the real football. Not the one in America. Sorry. His love for the game of football did not extend to fanaticism. In Able God's eyes, a football fanatic was an African who cheered for an English football club. Rooting for national teams and playing five-a-side football was enough for lovers of the game. Marufu followed the Chelsea Football Club. He couldn't afford to buy the club's all-blue merchandise, but he made up for it by talking non-stop about which players had been bought and sold and for how much, tracking every game, every win, every loss, placing bets on his team and getting into heated arguments and even scuffles with fans of Arsenal, Liverpool, and Manchester United. The one thing that struck Able God as truly strange was that Marufu never mentioned Chelsea when he talked about his aspiration to play for a club in Europe. In fact, he never mentioned any particular club. Which club would you play for when you get to Europe? Able God asked Marufu as they journeyed in the paddy wagon that day. I don't know yet, he said, his transistor radio cradled close to his cheek. When I get there, I would know. Maybe I will qualify for the feeder team first. What's a feeder team? Asked a Somalia with a narrowed head that tapered to a pointed chin. Able God answered, a feeder team is a club from the lower division. If you play well, they graduate you to the real team. Wait, you are talking about football, real football? Asked the Somalia with a little grin in the corner of his mouth. The eyes of those in the wagon filled with surprise and laughter. What do you mean real football? Is there fake football? Able God said in defense of Marufu. He was feeling bad for starting the conversation in the first place. Fiddling with the knob of the transistor radio, Marufu seemed impervious to their mockery. He had found the rickety taped-together transistor radio in a heap of garbage near the camp. It was a noisy contraption with static, bursting forth and vanishing. Up blue, one of them shouted. With that, they could no longer contain their amusement. Laughter echoed in the metal box. Able God had witnessed people mock Marufu many times, but this time was different. Usually, Able God would smile. Usually, Marufu would smile while mockers goaded him with laughter, but he would also have a pained look on his face. This time, his smile was unadulterated, like the smile of someone to whom nothing else mattered. They slid from side to side as the road twisted, but Marufu kept the transistor radio balanced. The radio crackled to life and spewed forth the commentator's baritone voice. Marufu's face lit up. A special BBC Sports Roundup featuring the very best of football coverage from the English Premier League. I am Toby Barkin, and as this season gets underway, why not sit back, relax, and enjoy some great goals and some magic moments from the game between Chelsea and Liverpool. Soon the focus shifted to the sound coming out of the broken radio, the rapid fire talk, the feverish excitement, the screams and the half screams. That Able God enjoyed, or at least loved, watching Marufu's reaction as he sat on the edge of his seat, his face tight with tension, his nose twitching. He would flinch and kick and tap the floor with his withered leg. The words formed images in Able God's head. He could picture the stadium filled with spectators in colorful jerseys and costumes, blowing vuvuzelas. He could imagine the lush green pitch and the nicely knitted players sweating it out in the arena. He even imagined an attacker on the left running towards the goal, his paws kicked up a notch. What a run! He passes to the left winger, and number 10, it's a goal, it's a goal, it's a goal! Noise erupted in the wagon as Marufu raised a clenched fist and sprang to his feet. He went around slapping and squeezing shoulders, his ruined teeth on display. When he came to Able God, he embraced his friend and shook him vigorously in unfettered excitement. Able God found himself making snickering sounds of joy. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. All right. Our next author is this on? Yes. Okay. Our next author is ZainKhalid. ZainKhalid was named a 5 under 35 honoree by the National Book Foundation in 2024. And he is the author of the debut novel, Brother Alive. Brother Alive won the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award and the CLMP Firecracker Award for Fiction, and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize for the best first book in any genre. Khalid is also the recipient of the 2024 Bard Fiction Prize. His writing has appeared in the Paris Review, The New Yorker, N+1 Book Forum, and elsewhere. He is an associate editor at The Drift and a continuing editor at Bidun. Brother Alive is both an immersive adventure and a necessary portrait of the rich Islamic culture besieged by capitalism. The book offers a moving portrait of the emotional perils of migration, the tangled loyalties, shape-shifting identities, and dueling ideologies are daunting, but they never overwhelm the bravery and resourcefulness of the characters. Please give a warm welcome to ZainKhalid.
I don't have anything to say about football, unfortunately. I suppose, as Samuel and I were talking earlier, like I do think that there is something to be said about a borderlessness that isn't really thought of, right? It's kind of. There's a version of the world that is both completely fluid and malleable, and people can travel from one place to another like a passport is in fact a magic ticket, and there are those people who are trapped or stuck, and there is a prison of non-movement, I guess, is the only way to put it, like stasis. And that, though I think that place, that feeling of being trapped is some of the best literature that is ever, like Proust writes from a bedroom, like there's only, that lack of movement becomes a world unto itself. And then And I think that in this novel, what I attempted, and I succeeded and failed at in different measures, but what I attempted was to understand that even when you are in constant flux, even when you are in constant movement, you don't allow, like you have to maintain a certain amount of stillness in order to understand. Otherwise, you were buffeted by the winds of the world, right? Like whatever, what Bloom calls it, the anxiety of influence. All of these influences, like it's this, and so that stillness, I believe, is kind of the root of this novel, even though it is so much in motion. And I'm surprised you're not a Tottenham Spurs fan. Also, I like that's. It's a football joke. I apologize. Because you always want the underdog, right? You kind of want the team that will never win. Like the Mets. I don't know if they won last night, but like I'm assuming they didn't. I didn't look. I didn't even look. Did you know if somebody know if they won? No? They didn't play. They're playing tonight. Okay, see, I don't know anything. Is the general. I just, like you always, a Mets fan feels like it's penury, it's punishment, and but there's when they win, there's nothing like it. I can't imagine a New York that, and so whereas Samuel made a good point that like these nation states create these borders, and to move through them is to understand them. And I think that that's fascinating. Like this, it's interesting because words without borders is now coming into my mind for obvious reasons, and translation is coming into my mind for obvious reasons. Like what does it mean to be translated? Is translation just a mask? Derrida said that he did not want translation, but of course it is necessary because it means the lack or the lack of any autographic signature. It's like you lose yourself when you lose your language, and I wonder about that little like that thing with my own novel. When you translate it, what is lost, and what is language but a border? Getting back to the Mets. They didn't lose yet. See, this is actually that's the point of this novel. You didn't lose yet. You will probably, but perhaps the attempt to continue is kind of the whole bit. Like it's this attempt to explain yourself to another human being, and if that is even possible, and it probably is. I hope it is, and I will say to open, because this opens in this place, and places for me are very important, and I know borders don't exist and they shouldn't, but New York City, Brooklyn, Manhattan, like the 5 boroughs are my country. Like it is as far as I don't really often consider myself an American. Like I'm not seen as one really often, and but I am a New Yorker, and I don't give a shit. Like it is just kind of where I love that place, and this book begins there, and it ends there. And even though it isn't constantly in motion, because New York is its subway, it has to return there. And so with that, I'll begin. When you ask, what should I tell you? Should I tell you that you inherited your leech, your louse, your pest from your grandfather? It isn't true. Calling your affliction an inheritance is too romantic, seeing as you share no lineage or no blood. More accurate to say you contracted it from your grandfather, who I'm still editing this book. I realize as I speak it, like this is, oh man, that sucks. It's never over. It's never going to be over. Never. All right, I'm going to go back 1 sec. More accurate to say you contracted it from your grandfather, who in his accelerated middle age was tricked into believing he was uninfected. Minutes after you and your sister were drawn into this world, he brushed your vermicelli hair and called you to prayer. He alternated line and ear, ensuring that each sister received only half the call to prayer and would need the other always. With this, he imparted something insane, abstract, and poisonous. In that moment, he had unknowingly afforded his blight an opportunity for self-replication. We are learning now that this alien is American in more ways than one. Faulting Imam Salim for returning to Markab is no different from blaming a pendulum for where it comes to rest. It would be easy to believe he left to unearth something for you, for me, even for himself, but that would be in ignorance of his selfishness. The fact is, he returned to where he wishes to die, and we are now here to bear witness. As I write this, your father is praying in the valley behind the campus, presumably for an answer and for your welfare. The trip has been long as a blood feud, long enough to provide an accounting of our family. If people tell tales about us, I hope they improve upon the source material. This, what I'm writing to you now, should comprise a compendium of what no one else would know to pass on. And when it ends, and we will come to our end, there is a chance that you might know us. I will be haunted still, endlessly wondering, is there more I should have told you? Ya Ruhi, which just means my soul. It's a conversation to oneself. I say to begin with, any birth is maliciously unoriginal. I say time will also destroy all that we do, whatever it is. And so, once more for the gallery. Dayo, Iseul, and I were born in that order in 1990. That is true. What came next is not so much true as it is what we are told. Your grandfather knows memory is often a lie sealed with the hot wax of repetition. It helps that he wielded his lies with the aplomb of God's own press secretary. The story goes that our first 3 years were spent in a daisy chain of New York foster homes. Then Imam Salim, purportedly feeling a deep loneliness, a sense of responsibility following his postgraduate stint in Saudi, made room for us. How and why we were kept together as a toddling troika was, for a long time, a mystery we had no interest in solving. Why look our gift father in the mouth? We had no past. Even our birth certificates, we would learn, were acts of retroactive continuity. Our last name somehow was Smith. Yusuf Smith. Nice to make your understandably confused acquaintance. It was possible back then to believe that we were born in the United States, and so we did. What we knew, however, what was written on our faces and what your grandfather confirmed, was that we were different from the citizens who could reasonably call this place their own. Dayo, your uncle, is Nigerian. Your father, Iseul, is Korean. And though he never deigned to give me what he gave them, not even a country of origin, I was considered and considered myself of indeterminate Semitic origin. My skin, more bark than olive, more Arab than Jew, led me to suspect I had ties to a spot 1 map inch east of the middle. When Imam Salim returned to New York, he did so with plans to revive his late uncle's mosque in Staten Island, which he himself lived above from the ages of 8 to 18, after his parents were found under the weight of an upturned lorry in Karachi. Occident Street Mosque. Our bricky low-rise lay slumped at the end of a houseless strip of concrete that was marked at irregular intervals by linden trees and at regular intervals by the wavery tide pool of streetlights. The mosque's revival required his dividing the prayer hall, constructing a side for the sisters. The second floor's bare kitchen was refurbished, the living room eventually bitmapped by an ugly rug, a coffee and dining table, a corpulent TV set. Up the next flight of semi-splintered stairs, 2 doors became 3. That's too many adjectives. 2 doors became 3, each opening into a bedroom. One was his, the second was ours, and the third, with the widest windows and most generous square footage, was kept open in the event someone was unsettled and in need of a roof. Inside Imam Salim's room was an office which he kept locked. Cultivating the backyard, Imam Salim planted a family of acacias, a choice made for unknown reasons. He also rooted more regionally appropriate selections, phlox, silverglass, loose strife, burning bush, but it was the acacias he doted on. His knees left grooves in their topsoil. I hope you understand. That should be "you must know," I think. I heard him say to them once, his behavior with the plants and generally was often bizarre. If we ever asked him about the emotionally fraught gardening, he would respond with a barrage of religious trivia. Did we know, he often asked, that the very first gods were born beneath the acacia's sheltering bow in Heliopolis? Did we know about Osiris, about the Phoenician god Tammuz, about Marduk, about a lesser-known but equally terrible god, Huitzipoli, once venerated by the Aztecs in Mexico? Did we know it was with acacia wood that Yahweh asked Moses to fabricate the Ark of the Covenant? We didn't know anything, did we? We guess not. We were 4. It doesn't seem so bizarre now that we would answer our questions with stranger questions, but at the time we thought him somewhat demented. And at the mouth of Ossidan Street was Coolidge, the neighborhood, the Coolidge houses, insular project housing community turned, Ruhi, you know the story, poverty's resultant grace. Saintly bodega owners, Umas, Lolas, Tias, and so forth, and so on and so forth. If there's grace to be found here, it is no thanks to the state's disaffection, underfunded schools, underemployed parents, addiction, nor is it because we occupy the state's margins. How flexible they become when they try to co-opt our depravities. When the state steals our capacity for vileness, our humanity goes with it. Coolidge wasn't mythic or magic, only differently naked from every other place. Our shadows lengthened across its courtyards. Our reflections aged in the spotty windows of disappointing restaurants. We learned to tightrope the curb of its narrow streets. Being positioned at the grooved tip of New York's most disregarded borough makes our people a little wild, I think, as if they have permission for their excesses. Here, the realization that the other end of your leash is tied to another neck comes early. You can't simply hop on the 5 train in Evanes. To escape Coolidge, you have to skiff part of an ocean. The ferry ride is what keeps most people from seriously leaving. For all the talk of the sweet mystery of the sea, the glittering, there are those whom it yanks into singular anxiety, not because we can't swim, not because we know more about various nebulae than we do about the abyssal plane. Ruhi, we looked at the shiny skinned sea and perhaps remembered, or feeled someone remembering, how they once split its glittering with a boat's stem, or passed over its vast navy from a nervously cruised altitude. But we had no one to remember through, and as such, when the time came, we were able to leave with less difficulty than most. In the beginning, your grandfather observed a great many rituals, as if hailing from an empire. Minutes before sunrise, he would call jinns to prayer. After Fajr, the first prayer of the day, he'd enjoy a coffee, a date, and a halved grapefruit while reading the international section of the New York Times, or eventually the Daily Star. Once the coffee emptied his system, he'd begin his exercise in the prayer room. He bent and contorted and stretched himself into positions that pitted gravity and his body weight against his muscles, freezing his limbs, the things a cat burglar might do to keep his wits. Limber and fatigued, he showered. Then he would trim his beard to an invariably uniform 2.5 inches long, a daily correction, a dependable measure of control. Bowls of cereal, toast, fruit were set on our kitchen table by 8:15, which is when the red dots of our alarm clock palpitated. At this point, Salim would sometimes feed the neighborhood cat he called Leviathan. Then we'd be downstairs, and before walking us to school, he'd ask how we slept and if we were well. Between the next 2 calls to prayer, he'd retreat into his office to indulge yet another peculiar obsession, his written correspondence. He'd emerge at noon carrying legal and letter-sized envelopes and walk them to the squat mailbox at the end of our block. We never saw anyone other than Imam Salim use that mailbox, leading us to wonder if the United States Postal Service had long abandoned that pickup. We joked about his mail piling up so high that his letters would return themselves to him when he opened the lid. On sick days and in the summer, we'd watch his routine and clamored to know just who he was writing to, what phone-averse friend group could be important enough to warrant such devout maintenance. After some pressure, he said, "How do you know I'm not sustaining a resistance with nothing more than my stationery?" "Because you're not," we replied, unsure about the meaning of the words resistance and stationery. Following his mail run, he would perform his ablutions, call again to prayer, louder this time, and start Zuhr, which is the noon prayer. He would do all of this even if he was the only person in the masjid. This is the job of an imam, he said, but he never made us pray, nor did he proselytize outside of the masjid. When we were old enough to ask why he abstained from advocating for his God of choice, even though that too was the job of a priest, he said, I've already performed all of the conversions I can stomach. Regardless, we would line up behind him and mimic his prostrations. What can I tell you? Guilt has an early onset and swallows loyalty. Faith, which I didn't have, is a binary that pre-exists one's birth. That's my feeling, anyway. Occasionally, a dimness introduced itself, and I'd find a nervous shape looming like a question in my periphery. Brother was not frightening then. He'd take on recognizable forms: bugs, birds, foxes, stags, cats, the occasional farrago of 2 or more species. Those sensations were housed within mine. They remained distinct, and in their center was a pervasive hunger. It was this hunger that first prompted him to approach me as I sat at the dining table alone, eating a quartered apple. That morning, he wore the body of a dog of the color of melted sun, like the mutt that was fond of foraging in the mosque's trash. I sensed Brother wasn't truly this dog. He didn't look, I don't know, real. He flickered like a poorly wired light, his anatomy more mercury than flesh. Noon decanted through the slatted blinds, separating him into fragments. That's not bad. His face sharpened at my face as if by excitement and happiness, the excitement and happiness of seeing an old preferred friend. But behind this look was hunger always. I pushed my last quarter of apple towards his nose. He sniffed it for a second, and then everything pulsed. There was a pain-tightened buzzing, a monosyllabic hum that made me blink hard. When I opened my eyes, the dining room was as before, only Brother had solidified. His fur was sown with dirt and leaves. He triple barked, a sign of contentment. My hand was still full, but I couldn't, for the life of me, identify what I was holding. I put it to my own nose. It smelled sharp and sour and sweet. I took a bite and it tasted how it smelled, but I didn't have the word for it that I used to have. He would treat me with merciful patience. He never took anything without asking and would always wait. Initially, he appeared once or twice a month. I would give of myself what I could, ideas I deemed small enough to let him have, curios, inane historical facts I learned from teachers and didn't care to keep, religious detritus gleaned from Salim, the 99 names of God, nothing of consequence. Brother wasn't picky, happy to subsist on my effluvia. Eventually, I was able to rediscover some things I fed to him, like the name and taste of an apple, but much has been permanently lost. There were times when my rubbish failed and his hunger was incessant, but because he was, to my mind, a relic of my bicameral consciousness, he was uniquely vulnerable to literature. By force-feeding him inwardness or structural exteriority, I could temporarily infect him, colonize him, replace his self with other selves, voices that were contagious and replicative. My strategy failed, of course. Literature is not an answer, only a window. So he developed taste. He dissociated from the shit public schools teach indigent children, the shit about homes on streets named after fruit, the state-sponsored writing about foils and masters and victimhood, to make room for anything that looked squarely at life's prevailing and mordant cruelty. Cruelty that inhabited his control over his own body. He could move me only the way a spirit might glide a planchet. As I grew older, Kivan, Gas, Thiongo, Jelinek, Mahfouz were more nearly parts of him than they were of me. On and on, it mutated him, us, so that the ironic detachment, or so that in the early days, what manifested as taciturnity would sometimes become ironic detachment or self-abnegation. This is stupid. There were also days when the words cast and clarified us in relief against a vast gulf, and we could look at each other and feel the blood throbbing, somewhat marvelously, in our fingertips and temples. It's worth noting that when nothing else worked, I smoked cigarettes. Years later, as Brother's existence became more fixed, he started to wander. I could be in the prayer room, and Brother, a Capuchin monk, he might be sitting in the back rows of the Village Vanguard or watching Andrei Rublev at Sinopolis, Chelsea. Today, for example, I am reading in the library, and he is a six-legged antelope bounding the tight streets of Old Markab. Yesterday, he was the scent of night-blooming jasmine. I don't mind him leaving, as he never leaves, not truly. He no longer even needs to feed off me. He is by my side and in my company always. He has even come to love whom I love, and in so doing, he keeps me from resignation. All right, thank you.
Hi. So what do you want to talk about?
We talked a little bit about movement and migration and sort of like this, and I thought that's like perhaps the superficial thread. It's the kind of the white thread that tie like it's like a gene, and so like I loved the line that you read, like he was born to it like. Okay. Yes, he was born to a different, like he was born with a different nationality, roughly, and it's kind of how I think it's interesting. It's interesting. It's something that everyone feels a little bit, I think, or perhaps perhaps it's unique to somebody who's not from the place. Like do you feel as though you're like a Francophile? Like he like is there a part of you that like values that? Why do you think that is? Why in your character? Why do you think that he believes he was born to a different nationality, or like born to the wrong nationality?
Yeah, great. I love movements and all its figurative movements. Movements on the page. Movement of characters. I think there's a lot to be said, about people who move and how people journey and all of that. When you move physically, it does something to your physical body. For example, I've been traveling for a while now, and I'm like physically exhausted. Right, but you see, what we don't often talk about is that it also does something to your soul. So I'm interested in exploring what the things you lose and the things you pick up as you move along in life, as you move from, in this case, migration, kind of move away from your country. There's an epigraph in my novel, is an excerpt from a poem by the great African poet Washan Shai. It says, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark." So I am not really, there are people who write stories about the African immigrant experience and the immigrant experience in the West and all of that. That's not really what I'm interested in. And you do that very well in your book, actually, because one of the reasons why I'm not interested in that is because there are a lot of wonderful authors who do that very well, who kind of capture that sense of alienation and, feeling, you are not, American enough, you are not Nigerian enough for the Nigerians and all of that. And that is great. I'm more interested in what brings them here than anything else. Yeah. And there's an entire conversation about that. Do you think about that in your work, or did you factor that into while you were writing this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Or like that's a really interesting line of reasoning. And kind of the it's kind of tied to what you were talking about, or like what you lose and what you pick up. Yeah. And I think that is you become this hodgepodge, or like this kind of conglomeration of ideas, influences, people, even, and they all are. What happens to the self is the self kind of it becomes less and less real almost sometimes, and so you were this I guess that is the easy allegory of brothers. Just like it's the anxiety of influence. It's like all of these influences, but where is the person? The person no longer exists. And yes, of course, and like what causes the mouth of a shark is interesting because the United States is so frequently that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so but no one gets to leave. You're kind of, you are in the mouth of empire, right? Something that is attempting to swallow you, and you just are you just contouring the mouth? Like, are you just like describing the teeth?
Yeah.
And that. So yeah, I think about it, but I don't know if I thought about it consciously. But it's like interesting to think about now.
Yeah, it's for example, the mouth of a shark in my own novel is these are all the things, because I'm also interested in interrogating the systems, right? People don't just leave their homes and all of that. For example, Africa contributes the least to greenhouse gases, but is the most vulnerable to climate change. And climate change is one of the things that drives people out of Africa. We have a post-colonial problem on the continent.
Of course.
Well, we all know how Europe underdeveloped Africa. I hope, and how a lot of African countries were held together by military regimes and militias and all of that. I grew up under the military regime in the 90s in Nigeria, 80s and 90s. We had over 30 years of military rule.
Yeah.
And it kind of fractured the country. And then when the military government handed over to a civilian government, it was just cronyism, corruption, everything just went out of hand. And a lot of young people become desperate because of that. A couple of years ago, Nigeria was the unemployment capital of the world, young people, imagine 20 million young people unemployed with nothing to do. So because of that desperation pushes, them out of the country. And you see, we often talk about this issue. Oh, they are there. They are invading our southern border. Oh, they are here. We do not realize that these are people. These are men. These are women. These are lovers. These are sons, these are daughters, and most importantly, these are dreamers. And that is one of the things we all share in common. Do you have dreamers in your novel?
Oh, well, it's just the whole thing is a big dream. I mean, it's like there's a futuristic city. Like this is quite a
aspirational,
ambitious is what I think. It has been called a lot. A post-college fever dream, someone said on Goodreads. A post-grad school fever dream. I'm going to find Tim in Idaho. I hate that guy. I think about him every day. Like sometimes I'm like, Arboretum, shouldn't have said it. Shouldn't have fucking, don't do it. And so,
oh boy.
But I do have a lot of dreamers. I think about the interconnectedness, like of this not problem necessarily, but sort of like, so the post-colonial problem in Africa, right? Mm-hmm. It was Europe's design, right? It's Europe's design, America's continuation, and now China's continuation, right? Roughly, right? And
absolutely.
Now we're thinking about like whoever has advantage, or like whoever has it will use it, and it is because we exist at the precipice of an end. Like it's. I think that it's and this has always been true. I believe. Like we've always talked about the end of empire. We've always talked about the end of the world. We've always wondered, like, when does the floor fall out from underneath us? Like, when is the rug going to be pulled? When does the Messiah come back? Like, it is the same question, and that I think I very much understood, or like I very much was feeling that this is a question that both will never be answered and will always be asked, and what are the material like consequences of systems asking that question of individuals. Right? The system is asking the question, like, when do you think it's going to end? What are you going to do to keep it going? How are you going to continue our project? And when the empire asks, you answer how high, right? Like it's that's what you often do. Like so dreamers frequently become machines or soldiers.
Yeah, aspirational. Yeah,
right. Like, and I wonder if that transition is something you thought about, like that move from dreamer to not soldier, but like enabler. Yeah, enabler. Yeah.
That's a great word. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So you have this. You have the protagonist in my novel, and then he's in the company of these other people, and then, my novel is a book of paradoxes, the fact that the protagonist is called Able God, but his life is such that, doesn't really bear that out in that sense. But you have them, and they are all dreamers. Marufu wants to be football. Yeah. Wants to join the Chelsea. Yeah.
Wrong team.
Yeah, but unfortunately.
Are you actually a Chelsea man? Are you?
No, I'm Arsenal fan.
Oh, okay.
Which is worse. Actually.
That is so bad.
Okay. And all of that. But Marufu is.
That is worse.
But Marufu is handicapped in that sense. So you have these people as now their dreams and their aspirations make them keep going. That's the driving force. They are one of them. The other one is religion, which we'll talk about in a bit. Keeps them going, but the way we have all these aspirations and dreams and all of that, but it also feeds into the larger idea of empire and of right. This is what. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Exactly. So that's what is going on in this novel, but it's indeed a driving force, and is what makes them endure all the hardship and all the things that happen in the novel. They just keep moving because they are dreamers, right? Yeah.
I guess this is an interesting way to get into religion, because so frequently the empire kind of like it. If religion is the dream of man, let's say, like, for a second, that religion is the dream of man, and the dream, it might be a cosmic seed, or like a cosmic thought that then flourishes into that dream, and then we wonder about the Messiah. We wonder about someone coming back to save us. We wonder about God, and we don't have an answer necessarily to these questions. But what we do have is structures to use again. Perhaps one of the prettiest things we have, right? Religion, like in the abstract, and I'm saying this, as I get older, which sounds ridiculous, but as I no, but I'm serious. No, fucking seriously, I'm just saying, It's true, and I'm not coming to God. Don't worry. I do believe that there is this reality that there's something interesting about the Judeo-Christian ethic. There's something interesting about polytheism, Buddhism, like all these, like John Fosse, who's one, like there's something about repetition and about repetition that creates sort of this catatonic, not catatonic state, but incantatory state, and it's an incantation, right? Yeah. Literature, the best literature, regardless of it is an incantation, and then it is used by whatever structure to create, it's somehow literature gets bastardized, and then you've got Britney Spears selling Pepsi. And I know that these two things aren't linked, but they are linked. It is an incantation. Like the literature of, you read Mahfouz, and then you realize they use that line in a Lay's ad by accident. It is the same thread that it's God being turned into marketing is not the right word, but again, it's an entry. I'm going to look to you for the word. A shill. There it is. Can you just do this? You just come up here. You do this.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should give the opportunity for people to ask questions soon. But just to add a little bit to what you said about religion. Now, in this book, religion is, like you said, is both a shield. Now, it's also a driving force in this story. It's one of the things that makes them keep going, because faith. Let me say faith. Yeah.
Also a dream.
Exactly. So faith tells you that there's a world out there. Just keep going. There's a better place out there. Things are going to get better, right? But also there's also Ben 10 in the a character in the novel who uses religion as a tool to oppress other people. So religion becomes like a two-edged sword in that sense. Yeah. Questions?
Thank you, Star. So, same question, or with a comment for, if people are escaping the shark, most of us would think of New York as the great white shark.
Oh wow. Hey, okay. Listen, I'm about to die for my city. This is about to happen.
But the question I have really is, when did you know or dream of becoming a writer?
Yeah. So, long story. I was depressed. I was a teenager. I was depressed.
That's everybody's story.
Yeah. It's like classic. And then my parents retired my father retired as a researcher. My mom was a professor, so we had books all around us. So I'd always I grew up reading books. By 15, I'd read all the Shakespeare, Henry James. So then I just I would lock myself up in the room and I had nothing to do, but I had books around me. So I just picked the books and started reading. I read everything: Henry James, Charles Dickens, the African Writers series. How many of you know the African Writers series? It's like almost 200 books, I read all of them.
Publishing house that did that?
Heinemann.
Yeah. Which ended up screwing over almost all of those writers.
Yeah. So and all of that. And then one day I said, maybe I can write. So yeah, and that was how it started. Yeah.
I guess I as I was also I am still depressed. So I don't know if we're like it's that has to be there. No, it's not necessarily a condition of creating writing. I too was I guess I came to it I was also my mother just loved literature, and even though she's a tyrant and a despot and perhaps one of the worst people to have ever existed, but also loved literature just to an extent that and books were, I think it was this like immersion, and then you read Henry James for the first time, and I still do. I as a writer, you are kind of isolated a lot, and I mean, you teach. So like you have like some sort of community. I'm out here in the nowhere. So like when you read like what was I reading most recently that I was reading like this essay collection by Jeff Dyer. I don't even know if that's the way to say his name, but Joff.
Jeff Dyer.
And when you see a mind at work that is in some ways similar to your own, even if it's completely different, even if the reactionary and the revolutionary, like there's this beautiful Iseulis Korean just died, who was one of the should have won the Nobel, but like I'm not going to get into why he didn't. And he and Lawrence Durrell, who is this reactionary writer who traveled and brilliant writers, both of them, but he's a reactionary and kind of wanted the like a conservative or like he wanted the return of like the supremacy, like sort of European supremacy, and they both wrote about consuming. Corey wrote about it as like you consume the oranges of Palestine, and in order to avoid being consumed by your homeland, you consume the homeland in order to be like. And Durrell wrote about these olives, and he's like, when I eat these olives, I am eating the dark scorched earth of Italy. I become Italy. And these ideas, to understand, to consume is to understand, to eat is to understand. Is these two people nowhere near each other came up with the same sort of thread, like found the same thread. And when you see that, you're like, oh, I have friends. And I write to commune with those friends. That's how I knew that I was writing for them, I guess. Yeah.
So I just want to announce that our 12:30 session in this space has been canceled due to illness. So we do have a little extra time. So we'll take a couple more questions, and then Sam and Zain will be here to sign books, and people can chat with them then too, because we don't have to rush.
This is for you, Zain, because Samuel answered this question. Your book is really amazing. I mean, it's so many levels of things, but what was where did it come from? How did it start? Was there one particular character? I mean, and it develops to the point where I don't think it's a fever dream. I just think it's like I was with you for the ride, but I was like, where did this come from?
I think it, and I think about it more and more now. Not as I'm writing the next one. I think about the genesis of it, like the like and that one certainly started with I had dropped out of college. I was in something of a mental institution, and I couldn't quite figure the difference between myself and the world around me. Like, I thought of everything as me and me as everything. And I couldn't, for the life of me, just figure out that boundary. And so Brother, like the idea was kind of this, like, Rumi calls it the friend. Proust also creates a version of it. Like, the double exists in literature throughout time. And Gombrowicz uses it to kill children. Like, but I couldn't see myself, and this kind of functioned as the outlet of this feeling of boundarylessness. Yeah, that would be. Yeah, and also I like after getting out, I went to go see family in the Middle East, and I saw kind of what was going on and how that was a place without boundaries, or like without borders, really. And it was creating a future because they understand, I mean, similarly to China and to much of Asia, that America's kind of dying. What can we take from America and create this brand new sort of utopia? It's also a story as old as time. Like, how do we create a perfect place? And so they use the language of inclusion. They use the language of like James Baldwin to create a oppressive, like religion and literature in those moments become very similar. And so I kind of tried to do that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, one more.
Hi. Zain, you said you were still depressed. So I would like to ask Samuel, now that you've left your room and published your book, are you depressed? If so, why? And if not, why not?
Wait. I have my moments. Yeah. But literature, books lifted me out of depression, and writing continues to be like a balm, like to my soul in that sense. So yeah, and a lot of people who know me now, there are people here who have known me since for 10 years. Yeah, they see this bubbly, lively person and all of that. I wasn't always like that. And there are moments when I kind of slip into that zone again, but I'm here. I'm still here. Yeah. That's what matters.
And we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Zain and Sam will be signing their books, and there are books for sale if you haven't brought your own right there at Emerson's table.